Okay, so let's get started. So it was talking about the different layers of Mila and Priya. So I'm just going to draw what it looks like when the baby's born. Okay, so this is what the foreskin looks like. It wraps around, it wraps over the corona. It actually, it's a little bit sticky here, and it actually sticks to the corona a little bit. So we were discussing Ora Priya and Ora Hamila. Ora Ha'arla, the Arla itself is the outer, is when a person's not mohel, the skin comes around. I mean, I'm sure most people have seen in real life what an arla looks like. You don't see the crown because the arla covers it over. So the outer side is.
Where would we get to see it?
If you ever went to a public gym, you see it. So you don't actually see when it's not erect, you don't actually see the crown at all. It's just covered over with skin. So imagine it's very loose skin just below the crown, and the loose skin allows it to, the loose skin hangs down and actually covers over the crown. So you don't even see the crown if it's not erect. You just see the loose skin around it. It almost looks like a birth defect. So this is exactly what it looks like. Now I'm drawing a cross section of it. So you don't see this because this skin wraps all the way around. So if you were looking at it from above, what it would look like is something like this. This is the skin, and then inside is the crown, which is like this. So, but this skin comes all the way around and it comes over the crown. So this is what it would look like if you were looking at it straight on. I mean, this is a dangerous position to be in. You can get shot in the face. And Moyalim do get shot in the face. It does happen. I know it happens with some of my children in oil checks. So that's what it looks like. So the outer surface is called the arla. The inner surface is called ara priya. Now there's two ways to do the bris. The way a lot of people do it is they'll grab the foreskin on top of the crown. So they'll go like this. So if it's from the top, they'll go like this and grab it, or they'll grab it like this. If it's from here, they grab it like this and they pull it. So when they grab it, it sort of stretches the foreskin up above the crown. And once the foreskin is pulled and stretched above the crown, then with a knife, they cut it off this way. So when everything falls back into place, what it ends up looking like is as follows. So what happened is now when everything falls back into place, so this all got cut off. Now it falls back into place. So there's a strip along the gid that has raw skin because that's the area that has raw meat because that's the area that the skin was cut. Right? That's where the wound is. But there's still a little bit of skin on top because when you're pulling it by hand, you cannot see inside where the top of the crown is. So when you cut, if you cut too far, you cut the crown, you have real trouble. So because of that, when they pull it by hand, there's a limit to how much they can pull it. And when they cut without a guard, they're going to leave some extra room. So what ends up happening is that all of this skin ends up getting cut because this is much softer and it could stretch much more. But this skin, part of it gets cut, but not all of it. So therefore, when things fall back into place, you still have a little bit of skin, which is the inner side. The inner side is called the ora priya. That inner side still is remaining a little bit. And in order to prevent it from bunching up over the crown, you know the Moilim have a sharp thumbnail. They tear here. Right now that it's taut, the skin is taut, it's going to hug the crown a little bit. But once they make this vertical tear in it, everything becomes loose, and therefore it falls down. So now, after they make this tear, what it's going to look like is exactly what we have now. There'll be a little layer of soft skin that'll just flop back down. Then there'll be raw meat, and then there'll be the rest of the gid. And then they bandage around here. That's one way of doing it. And that's when Mila and Priya are done in 2 steps. Now, Yido Fisher explained to me that if you take an adult oral, it doesn't work by urala. This only works by an oral. If you take an adult oral, this skin and this skin has the same consistency. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But on a newborn, there's a distinct difference between the consistency of this skin and the consistency of the skin on the inside. And this is much softer and pliable and stretchier. This isn't. And that's called the arhapriya. Now that's one way it's done. And the other way it's done is something called a hemostat, which I believe is a guard, where they pull this really, really tight, tighter than they normally would, and they put a guard over it, which is basically a clip that clips the skin right above the crown. Now, 2 things have changed. The first thing that changed is that it's very tight because you have a guard that's grabbing it and holding it. And B is you don't have to worry about cutting too close because the guard is for sure above the crown. When you slice it that way, then the ora priya gets removed together with the ora orla because it's much tighter and there's a guard there, and therefore the ora priya is totally removed. So that's Mila and Priya in 1 step. And they're done both ways. The hakpada to do it in 2 ways is, Yidel told me that it's brought down somewhere, I don't know if it's Rishonim or the Rak of the Torah, that it has to be the fingers. You have to use fingers to do part of it. And the only way to do that is if you tear the Ora Priya rather than remove it. So if you use the hemostat, then you end up cutting off the Ora Priya. If you do the 2-step where you only take off the Ora Mila with the slice, with the cut, with the knife, then all you're doing is tearing the Ora Priya so it loosens up so it doesn't grab the crown. Because in its natural state, this inner layer of skin is a little bit sticky and it sort of sticks to the crown. Now, if you pull it down completely, or if there's an erection and this grows, so this stretched skin will end up being down at the side. But normally it's a little sticky in here. Therefore, the people who use the hemostat, they want to make sure that they get all the Ora Priya. So before they do the bris, they stick in a probe and they stick a probe in like over here from the top, and they move it all the way around just to separate this Ora Priya from the crown. So they put a probe around and they create a separation. They just like pull the skin away from the corona. And then when they pull it and put the hemostat on, they get a lot of the Ora Priya, they get most of it out. And this way, when they're cutting it, it cuts off all of the Ora Priya that halachically have to be discussed. Now, I have a lot of papers around my house that if someone catches me, I'm not sure what they're going to think. I have all these pictures around my house now.
Okay, they're on YouTube too.
So that's what Yidel Fisher explained to me how it works. I wanted to have him come on this morning and explain it himself and answer questions, but he's traveling today. Okay, so that is the Gemara. So we are all the way up to the bottom of Kuf Lamed Zayin and base. But at least now I got a little bit of clarity of how it works, because I could never even imagine actually seeing it myself. I wouldn't be able to handle it. Okay, today's broadcast is sponsored by Shmuel Lerman. Le'ilon Nishvus, his father, whose Yosy, I think is tomorrow. Rabbi Binyamin Yehuda Pesach.
It was yesterday.
It was yesterday? Rabbi Binyamin Yehuda Pesach ben Shmuel Eliyahu, who's the Shamash of Rabbi Aliyah. It was yesterday. Okay.
Or the day before.
So it's in Tammuz, not enough. Shloimi Feintuch, even on Zoom, I could see what a beautiful tan you have. You look good. Baruch Hashem.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you. Shkoyach. It's beautiful out there.
Baruch Hashem. Oh, were you there yesterday?
Yeah, I saw I davened mincha with your son.
Oh, actually, my son told me he was there. Beautiful. Shkoyach. And we have Chaim Tzvi today as well. So welcome back, Chaim Tzvi. We're so happy to have you back. Please don't keep yourself on mute because we're definitely going to want to hear what you have to say. Oh, Mechi's here. Good morning. David Leitman's here. Okay, gewaltig. Good morning to everybody. Okay. Zok the Heilige Gemara. So we're all the way at the bottom. The Chachamim said we were discussing the Mishmeres. Mishmeres is a piece of fabric that they would put on top of a pitcher. So when they filled up the pitcher with wine, any shmorim, any pieces that were in the wine would be strained out of the wine. So the Chachamim said you're not allowed to put this on top of a jug, on top of a pitcher on Yom Tov. And you're not even allowed to, on Shabbos, not even if there is already a strainer, if the shmata is already on top of the pitcher on Shabbos, you're not allowed to fill it with wine because you're going to be straining. But on Yom Tov, al tzeichel nefesh, which is mutter on Yom Tov, you'd be allowed to pour it in. So let's see what the Gemara says. Iboilu, tolamai. On Yom Tov, you're not allowed to. The Chacham said you're not allowed to put the shmata on the pitcher on Yom Tov. If you did, what's the halacha? In other words, is it a chiyuv d'oraisa, making an oil, or is it only a chiyuv d'rabbanan? If it's a chiyuv d'oraisa and you did it, be shoyig, you'd be mechuyev to make a korban chatas. If not, no. Rabbi Yosef paskin tola chayiv chatas. According to the Chachamim, if you put the strainer, the shmata, on top of the pitcher on Yom Tov, it's a d'oraisa and you're chayiv chatas. It doesn't make sense to say that that's called making a strainer. And the Abai chooses to compare it to a much more obvious case. If you just took a keli and you hung it on the wall, you had a hole in it, and you hung it on the peg, you don't call that binyan. This also is too aridic to be considered binyan, that you should suggest that there should be a chiyuv chatas for it. What's the svara to say that there's a chiyuv d'oraisa because you put a strainer, a shmata, on top of a pitcher? My chiyuv ika b'oil aray binyan gomer like that's not called binyan. U'midrabanan hu demitzer. The reason why it would be osher is midrabanan. That wouldn't generate a chiyuv chatas. Zok to Gemara ela amar Abaye midrabanan hu. It's midrabanan. The whole isser to put the shmata on the top of the pitcher is only midrabanan, and we're introduced now to a new concept because Rashi tells us the misnizim deleshafkinan lemisle leme'eved uvda dechol. There's a new thing that's called uvda dechol. You're not allowed to do something that's similar to what you do in the weekdays. Now, to be magdir, this halacha, it's such a broad concept that you can't do what you do in the weekdays that it's difficult to appreciate how it works. So it's only things, the article speaks out, it's only things that in some way can possibly lead to a malacha. So not everything that we do b'chol, you're not allowed to do on Shabbos, only things that Chazal determined could lead to a malacha. Abaye put together, Rashi says, kololei shel prices. Abaye decided to pull together many different halachas and put them all together and present them together. V'toni, and this is what he learned. Hagoid v'mishmeres kilo v'chisegalin. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 items. He says lo yasa. You shouldn't make them. But if you did them, it's only aser midrabanan. Therefore, pater of a loser. So what are all these things? So the first thing is goid. So goid, Rashi explains, is these travelers used to carry their milk or their wine in very large leather bags, pouches. And in order to keep them cool overnight, so they shouldn't get spoiled, they didn't put them in the refrigerator. What they would do is they take this big bag, and I don't know if anyone's ever seen, they make these temporary big garbage bag holders. They're like a small wire frame that you could spread the bag over, that will hold it open so you could fill it up. So that's exactly what they did. They took the 4 sticks and they spread this bag open over the 4 sticks to hold it open. And this way at night, when there was a breeze, it was cool, it would keep their wine or their milk cool so it shouldn't get spoiled. So the question is, are you allowed to set that up on Shabbos? It's an oil irai. It does sort of create some type of oil, but it's only temporary. So that's going to be potter of a losser. It's usher to do the chachila. Mishmeres. I just got a note on my screen that my internet connection is unstable. Is my voice coming through clearly? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Mishmeres. Mishmeres is a strainer, like we discussed. Kila is a canopy, and Rashi says it's only considered a canopy that's an oil if it has at least one section on top that's a tefach wide. If it just comes to a point at the top, like a tent, that's not called a canopy. The kisei galon. Kisei galon was a sectional bed or a sectional chair that would be assembled and disassembled. Those are all things that lo yasa, you're not allowed to do them l'chatchila on Yom Tov and on Shabbos. But then also, if you did it, pater of a loser, because they're only asrats over the choylach derabanan. There's no derais involved. But oil kva, but a permanent oil, lo yasa, you're not allowed to do. V'masa chayiv chatos. Those, if you made, you're going to be chayiv chatos because that's a derais. Avul mita, a bed, the kisei, and a chair. The kisei traskel, I'm sorry, it's like a folding chair. The asla, and an asla is, Rashi says in one shot that it's a toilet seat. Mutter and toilet chila, you're allowed to make them. So these are all like folding beds that would fold up or fold over on their side. And then when you want to use them, you would bring them down like a toilet seat is standing up, you pull it down. Those are all things that are mutter l'chila to use. Because it's not over the chayil, and you're not even doing anything. Rashi is deloy midi ovid el yisuva ba'alma. You're just preparing it to lie on, but you're not really, or by the toilet seat, said shum salkanoy, sorry, shem chanosh l'koshel, they lean against the wall. But these are all things that's how they're normally used, so they're not even considered over the chayil, because it doesn't look like you're taking them apart and putting them together. It's like a folding sheet that you fold up. You're just putting it to the side, but you're not really building or dismantling anything. The Chachamim said, if you have this strainer that's on a pitcher, you're not allowed to fill up the wine through this strainer. Iboilahu, shimer mai. What if you did do that? What's the halacha? Amar Rav Kahana, shimer chayiv chatos. If you strain wine, you pour wine through this shmata into the pitcher, you chayiv chatos. Matzkav l'Rabsheshes. It's very hard to say that you should be chayiv chatos, because in our Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer, the first one that holds that it's muter lechatchila to pour wine through the strainer at Shabbos. So are you going to suggest that Rabbi Eliezer holds this is muter lechatchila, and the Chachamim who say you can't is going to hold it to deraisa, and you're even chayiv chatos? Mi kamidi the rabbanan mechayiv chatos for Rabbi Eliezer shor lechatchila. It's such a machloikis mikotza lakotza, that's not common. Matzka for Rabbi Yosef, alam aloi. Why would you say that there's no such thing? I'm going to demonstrate to you in a different case where there was a machloikis, where one mandamer holds it's mutal chatchila, and the other mandamer holds it's also midiraisa, and you even have to bring a korban chatas for it. Because our ir shalzov was a type of tachshit that women wore that had a picture imprinted on it of the city of a city. Reb Meir mechayev chatos. Reb Meir holds if a woman wears that on Shabbos, she's chayev chatos for being mechal Shabbos. Reb Eliezer shari lechatchila. Yet Reb Eliezer holds she's allowed to wear it lechatchila. Mahi, where is that machlokes found? We learned this already earlier in the Masechta. B'ma'ishi yotzes. The Tanya lo says isha be'ir shalsov. A woman should not go out with that. V'im yotza, and if she does go out with it, chayev chatos divrei Reb Meir. The Chachamim says, and Rashi says, why is the chayav chatos? The lav tachshitu. That's not called a tachshit. Elamasri, it's a load. Carrying a load on Shabbos is going to be also. Divrei Meir, Chomer Loi say she shouldn't go out, but Vimyotus Patur. But if she went out, she's Patur. Again, the reason for it is Rashi says the Takshidu. It is a Takshid, it's not a Masi. But look at Chila Oser Dilma Shalfo Machve, because she might meet her friend, and her friend said, "Wow, I love what you're wearing. Can I see it?" And she might take it off and show it to her friend, and then walk with it. And Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yoytze Isha Be'ir Shazov Lechatchila. He owed you Lechatchila. Why? Rashi demand Daka Lemebik Be'ir Shazov. Who's going to wear such an expensive piece of jewelry? Isha Chashuva. Isha Chashuva L'Shofa Machva. And Isha Chashuva is not taking jewelry off to show people. So you see over here, you have a machlokes mikatza lakatza. Omer le Abaye, mi savris, Rabbi Eliezer der Meir Kai, Domer Chayev Eschatos. Rabbi Eliezer is not arguing a machlokes mikatza lakatza. He's not commenting on that the Meir said you're Chayev Chatos. Ad Rabbanan Kai. Rabbi Eliezer is commenting on the Rabbanan, Dami Pata Veloser, V'Amar Lahu Iu Mutar L'Chila. So the Gemara is saying, since he's not directly arguing on Rabbi Meir, he's only directly arguing with the Chamim, we don't consider it a machlokes mikatza lakatza. But Lamais it is, right? So Tosha says that. Tosha Bleib Shver. Tosha says, Mi service Rabbi Eliezer Kai Rabbi Meir, Lo Yoda Rebbe Mike Mashani. My Rebbe didn't know what the Gemara means to answer. So I don't either get it so clear. But Tosha says clearly, this is still a machlokes mikatza lakatza. Zok Gemara weiter. So this we have established that it's osur, and you even bring a chatos if you pour wine through the strainer. The question is, what is the malacha that you're over if you pour wine through the strainer? What would you warn him if it was a question of a deraisa? It was a question of misa, of a mazid. What would the hasra be? Rabbi says this is the isra bayer, because you're actually separating the wine, which goes through the strainer, from the shmorim, which remain above, which are captured by the strainer. Reb Zeir Omar mishum meraked. It's not straining that you have. You're over the isra meraked, which is separating. Meraked is the malacha of pulling psoilus. If you're separating grain, you'd pull the pieces out of the grain or any other thing that you're growing. You would have a whole basket full of stuff, and you'd pull the pieces out of it, the psoilus, to leave the good kernels, the clean kernels inside. So one man holds the problem is boirer, which normally is taking the psoilus out of the oichel, and one is meraked, meaning I'm also taking the psoilus, I'm picking out the psoilus and oichel. Omer Rabba Kavasa Didi Mistaber. It's more mistaber to say that there's an isser of boirer here. Why? Ma darker shall boirer. How do you do boirer? Noitel oichel, you take the food, umanichas a psoilus, and you let the psoilus go away, right? Boirer oichel mit psoilus. Af hachanami noitel as oichel, you're taking the oichel, umanichas a psoilus. Now, Rashi tells us that Rabbah is not arguing Abseir. Rabbah agrees that meraked would be an appropriate malacha, but he holds that this is also boirer. So let's see Rashi. The noitel oichel manich psoilus ulerava hu adin nami the asri be mishim meraked havasra. Rabbah holds that this qualifies as meraked as well. It should Abseir says that boirer is inappropriate over here. Avol Abzeira, he asked Rebbe Mishum Boyer, Lavas Rahi, the Loidama LeBoyer. He doesn't consider this similar to Boyer, because in Abzeira's opinion, Boyer is Sha'oichel Lamata Upsoilis Lamaila. When you strain something, the oichel remains on top, you capture what you want to keep, and you let it escape what you don't want. Mashenkin Beboyer, Kitni Shapsoilis Lamata. So over here, what was happening is he's capturing the shmarim, and he's allowing the wine to go through into the pitcher. The way Reb Zeir understands boyer is when you're taking the pieces of psoilus out of the where what would happen is the psoilus would go down, and you would capture the food that you want to keep. So in our case, we're capturing the shmarim, and we're letting the wine go into the pitcher. According to Abzeir, that's not what boyer is. Boyer is when you capture what you want and you release what you don't want. That's why Reb Zera holds that boyer isn't appropriate over here. So Omar Reb Zera, Kavasa Didimus Jabra, Ma Daga Shomarakid, Psoilus Milamaila, the psoilus gets retained above, and the good thing goes through the strainer. Av Hachanami, so too in our case over here, where I'm pouring the wine through the strainer, psoilus milamaila, the pieces, the shmorim, stay captured above in the shmata, and the wine runs down into the pitcher below. So Dr. Bzeir, I hold boyer would not be an appropriate malacha. This is not boyer. Yet Rava holds this is considered boyer, even though I'm capturing the psoilus, I'm not capturing the oil. Tani Rabbi Bar Yecheskel, talis kfula lo yasa. A talis kfula is a lot of people now in the coronavirus have set up tents without walls. Many minyanim have that. So there's 4 posts and then there's a cover, but there's no walls. That's what a talis kfula is. You take 4 posts and you spread a shmata over it. Now, the reason why it's called kfula is because, like those tents, the surface of the roof is not just on the roof, it hangs down a little bit on the sides. So it's kfula because it's hanging over a little bit on the sides. You're not allowed to do that on Shabbos. But v'im also, if you did do that, poter avaloser. It'll be poter to do, but it's going to be also. Rashi says, talis kfula yasa, l'shtoyach talisoi al gabi arba yisedos, lishon tachtaha. You'd spread your beged over 4 posts because you wanted to create yourself somewhat of a shelter to sleep underneath. And a little bit they would hang over down to the floor. They would be like a little wall. So you're creating this to work in the heat. They actually, a lot of people who are HVAC mechanics, in the last 2 weeks, there was such an intense heat wave. A lot of people actually set up these temporary tents on the roof over the area that they're working in to protect them from the sun. So Zok Tehila Gemor, Talis Kula Yasavim Osa Potter Avaloser, Hayakarach Alechut Oy Meshicha, Mutter Lantois Lachatchila. What if you had you set up a frame and the talis is already connected to one side of the frame, and there are strings on the other end of the talis that you could pull to stretch the talis over the top of the frame, which is very similar to how people make shlaks. The cover, the tarp, would be connected to one wall, and it would have strings at the end of it that you would pull to stretch it and pull it over the whole top of the sukkah. So that's mutar l'chatchila. Because there you're not doing anything, everything's already built. Rashi says, if you connected one side to one wall, and it was sitting on a frame, when it's folded up, and you connected it to a rope where you could pull to pull the other end of the tarp to cover your sukkah. You're allowed to pull that on Shabbos. The moisef al oil arahu ve'ino kosher l'chila. Sides oil arai, and you're just being moisef on it. It's already fixed in place. You're just pulling the rope to stretch it over the top of the sukkah.
But it isn't making an oil the act of covering, the act of actually covering it. So before it was uncovered, now the area is covered.
So this is called moisef al oil arahu. There's already an oil there. It's already connected in place. All you're doing is extending it. So the awning already covers a certain area.
Well,
let's say opening the awning, you're extending it.
Well, the area that it covers is so insignificant that it doesn't matter. What you want is an oil that matters. If you'll excuse I thought it was the act of covering an area.
So from here we see, in fact,
that wasn't previously covered.
Well, so from here we see that extending an oil, even though you're covering an area that was not previously covered, would be mutter. And that's what we do. Everybody who has a shlach does that.
Some people are makbid to leave a little bit covered.
To leave a tefach open.
Yeah.
There's actually a shaila in this halacha if you would have to leave a tefach open. Right. So if you leave, and Rashi is saying you
mean
must
tefach
have
close,
oil,
you mean
all right,
tefach-
which means there has to be a tefach there. So there already is an oil, and you're just extending it further. You're taking an existing oil that's already a tefach, and you're extending it further. That's why Rashi says moisef al oil aray, not oisa oil aray. So there already is an oil aray, and you're just adding to it.
I understood the reason was mutter because he had schach. It's already an oil.
I never understood. I never thought of that.
As
I
far as
always thought
sukkahs
because
go.
you're being moisef on the oil aray. Schach isn't much of an oil if it's raining.
Well, it's good enough of an oil to be yotze the mitzvah of sukkah.
I hear. So you're saying making one oil on top of another oil, that's why it's not a problem.
I don't know where I got that, but that's what I understood.
From here in Rashi, we see that if you have an oil aray and you want to extend it, you're allowed to do that.
But if the awning's all rolled up, so
Well,
it's
if when it's
hardly-
all rolled up, it still
call
doesn't
it an
cover a
oil.
tefach. Well, it depends. If it's open a tefach, there's some things, even when they're completely rolled up, they still take up some space. But if it extends a tefach, when it's all rolled up, then it's never really all rolled up because it's always going to protrude a tefach.
We
If
had
you're
this
on the
shop
shlock, they
with,
tell you to leave part of it open.
we had the Yosy Zalman with umbrellas that are on top of picnic tables, these open and closed umbrellas, whether you're allowed to open them or close them on Shabbos. And the Rov actually told me that that you got to leave it open just a wee bit.
That's right. Moshe Rubin said also, you have to open, yeah, it has to be open a little bit because then you're being moisef on the oil aray by opening it up.
And so I asked him that same question, even if the umbrella is totally closed. And by the way, this is an umbrella only that is held, that's fastened permanently to a deck or to a table. But so I asked him that same question, even if it's totally closed, it's still a tefach wide on either, like the umbrella takes up a tefach of space. And the Rav said, no, just leave it open a little bit.
Interesting, because Moshe
That's my
Rubner, you must have asked him. Moshe Rubner said that the Rav said even when it's closed, it still sticks out a little bit. So as long as it's not tied together, now sometimes in a typical umbrella, after you close it, there's a strap that wraps around it that ties it together.
Yeah.
So he says, as long as that tie is off, it's automatically, naturally, it's going to spread out a bit. That would be enough. That's what Moshe Rubner quoted. Oh, there you got it. Look at that.
What if it's already if it's under the part of the roof is covering that part already?
Because the extension of your roof, where your
That's
roof
right, the
extends west.
overhang.
So you already have an oil eye right there.
Yeah,
But that's not, I don't know.
that's usually the case, actually.
In most
That's
cases.
often the case.
I don't know why David says that a sukkah is called an oil. A sukkah. Where did we ever hear that a sukkah? We called a sukkah a diras arai, but we didn't call it an oil.
It's all over the Torah, actually. You never find that people, went back to their sukkahs. They always went back to their oils. There's no evidence that there was an actual sukkah the way we know it in the Midbar.
Right, but do Chazal call a sukkah that we make for sukkahs in the Gemara throughout Shas? David, you went through Shas already. Do we call it an oil?
All right. The word sukkah actually means protection. That and
Protection
the
from the sun. How we
the
start
word
off.
schach also means protection.
Right, but it
So-
could be protection from the sun. That's how we start off Masechta Sukkah. Yosy Zalman, help me out.
Yeah, it's Slav Dafka shelter from the rain. I mean, it doesn't help you from the rain. If rain doesn't get through, it's actually not a kosher sukkah.
It's actually a symbolic protection, just like the Anane HaKavod was. So it's reminding
And
us.
then they covered were not symbolic. They actually protected you from the rain.
That's right.
There was
No,
climate control.
but it doesn't protect us. The rain's right through. That's
Yes,
why I
of course.
call it symbolic.
But it seems the reason why the shlak is mutter is because it's an oil aray that you're merely extending, similar to Chaim Tzvi's patio umbrella. Okay, so let's see what the Gemara says.
But I
But
asked the
everybody-
Rav, about the shlock. He said because it's connected on the side of the house, it's like opening a door. It's hinged. It's like opening a door, but it has to be connected.
Right. It also became practical when a woman has a little stroller and she wants to open up that little shade on the stroller to close it and open it.
Right. So there you're allowed to if it's partially open, right?
Right.
Because again, you're only extending no alari. So boy minei Rav Kahana me Rav. Rav Kahana had a shayla from Rav. Kila mahu. What is the look of the kila? A kila is a canopy that has at least a tefach, a flat space at the top. So Rav Kahana didn't answer what the halach of the kila was. Rav Kahana said, "Amar le af mita asura." Even putting a bed together is asur, which would indicate that not only is a kila asur, a mita is also asur. Then Rav Kahana asked Rav a different question. Mita mahu, what's halach of the bed? Amar le af kila muteris, which would indicate both a mita and a kila are muter. Then he said, let me ask them both together. Kila umita mahu. What's the halacha with each of those two things? Amrlei kila asura umita mutaris. And now Rav Kahana is scratching his head, like, now I'm totally confused, Rebbe. What are you talking about? V'loi kasha. These three piskei halacha are actually not contradictory at all once you analyze what each of them meant. Hadakamar af mita asura. When Rav Paskin, that even a mita is asura, it's kidde karmenoi. It's a bed of a karmenoi. So Rashi Haini Gal Nanisa Shaparka Umachsira. You take it apart and you put it back together. Fushay Mokim, karmenoi was the name of a place. Lashanacha karmenoi is moichrei bigde pishkan moichanalem. Or karmenoi are people who sell pishton, so they make these little tables that they put their wares upon. But these things are building like a permanent oil, and those are usher because they're very permanent. When Rav said that a kila would be mutter, that was a kila k'derami bar Yecheskel. That's like Rami bar Yecheskel, which is the shaila that we just had earlier. It was talus kfula lo yase v'imasa potter avol osir. But if it had which is what we were talking about earlier, then it's the mutter l'chila. So when he said af kila muteris, he was speaking about a kila that was connected on one side, like our shlocks. That's where he said it was mutter. And then when he said kila asura mita muteris, then he was talking about a kila kedidan, which means where you want to just put up 4 posts and put a shmat over it, where we said that's also l'chila, but potter from a carbon. Amr Yosef. Chazini lahu lechili devei Rav Huna. I saw when I went to Rav Huna's house, I saw they had these kilis that they used to put, like they used to make these canopies. The me'orta nagidu, at night they were connected and put together. Mitzrafin in the morning, chavita rami, I saw them all dismantled on the floor, which tells me that they held you were allowed to do it. So it must be, if that's the way it was, it must have been done in a way that it was mutter. So the way it was mutter, it seems, is the way Rabbi bar Yecheskel explained it, that it had strings to pull it open and closed, and that's why it was not a problem. Amarav, Rav Samdim Rabchia, Vilon. What is the halacha of the Vilon? Rashi explains that a Vilon is a mosach shekeneged a Pesach. You have a door opening and you have a curtain in front of the door opening. Mutal and toisoi, umutal farka. You're allowed to hang up a curtain that covers a door on Shabbos, and you're allowed to remove the curtain. V'amar Shmuel, and Rashi explains, very important, shein oil elami she'asa ken gag. The only time there'd be an issue of building an oil is if it's made on the horizontal plane, like a roof. But here it's in a vertical plane, covering a doorway, there's no issue there. V'amar Shmuel mishum b'chia. And Shmuel said in B'chia, Kilas Chasanim, the canopy that they put over the Chasanim, is mutal and toisa. You're allowed to put it up on Shabbos, or mutal forka, and you're allowed to take it down on Shabbos. What is this Kilas Chasanim? So Rashi, loy domi l'shar kilos. It's not a regular flat canopy. Sheshar kilos prusos al gabi kinoiv shehi l'dal reglayim v'yesh logag to have oil. A normal canopy has 4 posts, flat surface on top. Your mamish making an oil that we said was osir. The shal chasanim is like a tent. It's only standing on two posts. At the center of the headboard, at the center of the footboard, you have a single post that rises, and then you and then you have one pole that goes from the top of the post of the headboard to the top of the post of the footboard, and then you spread a tarp above it. So that's like a tent with a point in the center. There's no flat roof. It doesn't have a flat space of a tefach, and therefore you're allowed to do it. Now we're going to learn that there's so many restrictions about this that it's pretty difficult to do. And here we start with the first of the three restrictions. So rule number one is it cannot be like the teva, where it was a slanted roof, but at the top it was flat. This has to be pointed at the top, because if there's even the width of a tefach of the roof, meaning if you use a 2x6 as the cross beam, you're going to have a problem, because a 2x6 is a tefach. You can use a 2x4 as the cross beam, because that's only 3.5 inches, which is less than a tefach. Even if the point, the top, is not a tefach, there's still another problem. Based on the slope of the roof, by the time we're 3 tefachim below the top, it still can't be a tefach wide. If by the time you go down 3 tefachim, you're a tefach wide, also it'll still be also, because if there's a flat area, or even a virtual, an imaginary flat area of a tefach within 3 tefachim of the top, using lovud, you'll make believe like that was flat on the top. And just to show a picture of it is right over here. It's showing that 3 tefachim from the top point, it cannot be a tefach wide, because if it is a tefach wide at that point, that would also be considered like a kila, like a tent, and then there would be a problem of making an oil on Shabbos. So now that's the second restriction. Now we have another restriction. Besides the fact that within 3 tefachim at the top, it cannot be a tefach wide, all the way at the bottom of this roof, if you measure from the center line of the roof to the edge of the roof, there cannot be a tefach. But if at the bottom of the roof, if you measure from the center line to the tip of the roof, it will be a tefach, then shipuay ahalim kahalim dami. We also consider that like an oil. And again, let's have a look at what he says over here. The article shows it over here. Here is the center line. Just point to it. Here is the center line. This is the center line. This is where the oil extends to. If from the center line to the edge of the oil, there's more than a tefach, that's also going to be a problem. So at the end of the day, from end to end has to be less than 3 tefachim, because this top center line cannot be a tefach, maximum a tefach on this side, maximum a tefach on that side. So from end to end, you only have 3 tefachim. A chosin that can fit under that bed is a very skinny chosin. So there are those who learn that that's only possible. The way they used to make it was they had multiple such canopies over the bed. So the article either it was just decorative, it wasn't really protecting him, because chances are the room that he was in had a roof that didn't leak, so he didn't really need it for protection. It was just for an ornament. It was just a decoration. Or they had multiple ones of these, because the maximum width of this whole assembly had to have been less than 3 tefachim wide.
Is this saying that they practically did this, or that you can't effectively make one of these canopies? Like, did they do it like this second, like this drawing in the right column, or they just didn't?
So the article comments that either they did it, but they just won, and it wasn't really functional. It was just style. Or if it was functional, they had to make multiples of these and put them together.
But you would only do this. This is only an issue on Shabbos, and you'd only do this if you got married Friday night.
And no one set it up before. That's correct.
Right. So But since people didn't, I mean, typically you didn't get married on a Friday.
No, there was a lot, in those days, a lot of people got married Friday. It was pretty
I thought
common.
you had to get married on Wednesday so you could go to Basin if there's a problem.
Oh, but they often did make weddings on Friday too.
Oh, that was
I think
to save money. You're
this
saying.
is a basula and this is Tuesday night,
Right.
so that they can go to Besin. But
Yeah.
they had second marriages in those days as well.
Okay.
So I think they did do these types of things. I would have told my father, forget that, just give me the money instead. But that's how they used to do things then. So let's see what it says. And there's one more connection. There's one more restriction. Where does the bottom of this roof end? Does it end above the mattress or below the mattress? If it ends below the mattress, so now it's creating a virtual wall for which the mattress is now the roof. So if you have a mattress as the roof of an oil, and then you have the side wall where the canopy hangs down below the mattress, then it would be also, because that's also making an oil underneath the mattress. And Rashi says, have a kier that will act as a wall, oil for the oil, legag. So this brings up an important question. The ArtScroll brings it up. How could you put a tablecloth on top of a table on Shabbos? When you're putting a tablecloth on top of a table on Shabbos, you're creating an oil, because the tabletop is the ceiling of the oil, and where the tablecloth hangs down, it's the walls of the oil, similar to what the Gemara is outlawing over here. Or how could you make your bed on Shabbos? The same thing. When you put your cover on nicely, you're ending up that the cover hangs down to the side of the bed. How could you do that? So he's masbir that there's a chiluk. If the purpose of what I'm covering is to use the top of its surface, no one's going to consider that an oil. When you're setting your tablecloth, unless the children want to play house underneath the table, you're setting the table for the top of the tablecloth. That's not considered an oil, of that's mutter. Same thing when you're making the bed. But in this case, the oil was part of an assembly that was on top of the bed. Only then would it be osir. Okay, so now we're going to get to a very interesting Gemara.
Speaking, you cannot play house with your kids by putting. You cannot do that. How you can do that for them?
I'm not sure. So you're saying, what if Yutaka wanted to play house and you wanted to play house underneath the table?
Yeah,
and there was nothing on the table. Would you be allowed to?
Yeah, or do it with. I mean, they do it all the time. I mean, a 13-year-old wants to join and and do that from one bed to the next. You're not allowed to do that. I can't believe that. I mean, not that I can't believe it. I'm very surprised. I never heard that before.
I'll have to ask. But it seems like you're not allowed to make an oil, and making a play tent might be making an oil. I'm not sure. I'll have to look it up. I guess I have to look it up before Shabbos, because Shabbos is coming, and that's when. And if I don't figure this out before Shabbos, Chaim Tzvi, you're not going to sleep well this Shabbos afternoon, because you're going to have to start taking care of your kids because they can't play house the way they're used to. So we better get this fixed. This is urgent. Okay.
All right, I'll let you go ahead.
Okay. Zok the Gemara weiter. The Omer Reb Sheshes by Radio Abidi. Reb Sheshes by Radio Abidi said, "Hi Siana Shari." Does anybody have a sienna? You're allowed to have a sienna. Rashi says it means a wide-brimmed felt hat. My kids identify the size of a brim by how many lanes it is. So they claim that my hat is a 6-lane highway. And now the style is only to have a 2-lane highway. So if you have a brim of a hat and then it's going to be a tefach, it's going to be mutter. Frek the Gemara about Itmar sienna aser. We learned that a sienna is aser. So if it's a sombrero and it creates an oil of a tefach, then you have a problem. If it doesn't have a tefach, it's not a problem. Frek Gemara, you told me anytime a beggar has a tefach, it's a problem. If you put your talus over your head and it sticks out, your atorah sticks out a tefach, you're chayiv when you put on your talus because you made an oil. Avadanat. There's no shiloh over here of an oil. The shiloh here is a completely different shiloh, Rashi. We're afraid that if you have too big of a brim, it's going to act as a sail, and a wind will come, an easy wind will come and just blow it right off your head. And what's going to happen if it blows off your head? You're going to go run after it. You're going to pick it up. And it could come to carrying it. If it's well tied down to your head, it has nothing to do with an oil. It's just saying a hat that you don't have to worry will blow off, you're allowed to wear on Shabbos. A hat that you're afraid can blow off, you wouldn't be allowed to wear on Shabbos. Shalach lei, Rami bar Yecheskel l'Rav Huna. Rami bar Yecheskel sent this shayla to Rav Huna, and he said, Eimer Lanizi, my dear friend, tell me, Hanech milim el Yasa, the Geshmake Shiurim, you used to tell us over these Geshmake Shiurim, the Amrit la Mishmei derav, you used to tell us Geshmake Shiurim in the name of Rav, and the way the Shiurim would be structured would be there would be Tarti b'Shabbos, there'd be first you would mention 2 Chidushim in Hilchos Shabbos, and then the Chada b'Torah, and then you would tell us one interesting Agadah Tushtikal. So do me a favor, share with me one of those Geshmak Shiurim. Shalach le, Hadatanya, good Bekisna Mutal and Toisa b'Shabbos. That we said that you're allowed to hang you're allowed to hang a bag on a peg on Shabbos. Good bird. So you're allowed to hang I think it's hanging a bag that has straps that it hangs on, that you're allowed to put it on, that you're allowed to stretch it on Shabbos. Rav said, Lo shanu ela beveis b'nodim. I'm sorry, this is going back to the first halacha that we learned today. If you have this big leather bag that we said you're allowed to set up on 4 posts on Shabbos, and the liquid inside it stayed cooled, that's ela beveis b'nodim. That's only if there's 2 people setting it up. Because when 2 people set it up, they're not going to pull it tight enough to really make it into an oil. If one person is setting it up, so he's going to the first post and tightening it, then he goes to the second post and tightens it really, really well, and then he goes to the third post and the fourth post and makes it really tight, then it's going to be usher, because that's going to be making an oil. Amar Abaye v'chila, but if it's a chila, which is a canopy that has a flat portion on top, I feel be yud b'nei adam usher, even if 10 people are working on it together, it would be usher, because he afsher delay mimtacha porta. It's going to be pulled tight, and if it's pulled tight a little bit, that's going to create an oil. That was the first halacha of Shabbos in this year. Idich mai, what's the second halacha? The Tanya Kira shenishmata achas miyach. Akira is an old-fashioned pot. Basically, it looks like a box that's enclosed on all 6 sides, except for 2 round holes on the top, which is where you would place the pots. This box had legs at the bottom, 3 little legs at the bottom. If one of its legs fell off, mutlatatla, you're still allowed to carry it. It still will not be moved. Shtayim, but if 2 legs fell off, then osir, then it's going to be osir. Rav Amar afilu chad nami osir. Even if 1 leg is missing, it's going to be osir. Gzer shema yiska. I'm afraid you're going to put it back on. So Rav holds you're afraid you're going to put it back on, tighten it on, even if only 1 leg falls off. And the Tanakama held only if 2 legs fall off. So those were the 2 Hilchos Shabbos. Now we're going to get into the Agadah. Torah, what is the Torah? What's the Agadah that you heard from Rav? Domer Rav, Asida Torah shetishtachach miYisrael. There's going to be a time le'aleinu where Torah will be forgotten from Klal Yisrael. Shenemar, it says, the Hifla Hashem es makoischa, the Rebbeinu Shalom is going to make your makis astounding. Hafla zu, eini yodea ma'u. I don't know exactly what it's referring to. Kishu Omer lachein, hinini Yosef lahafli es amazeh. I'm going to astound this nation, haflu of a fella. And Rashi tells us that the seif of the pasuk, which you really see inside, it says lachein hinini Yosef lahafli es amazeh, haflu a fella. And then the punchline is the avda chachmas chachamav ubinas nevoiniv testator. So the Torah, the pasuk clearly says there that what we're talking about with this haflah is a loss of understanding of the Torah. Hava omer haflah zu Torah. Taner abad Kishenichnasu Rabbi Seinu leKerem b'Yavne. When the Klal Yisrael, when the Rabbanim went into Kerem b'Yavne, which was the new yeshiva that they set up in Yavne. Now, David will help me if he's here still. The Kerem b'Yavne was a yeshiva that they made where there was already a decline. I believe that's already when the Yidden were under assault. They made, who was the Chacham who said, Ten li Yavne v'Chachamel? That was already a yeshiva that was made when they were under the rule of the enemy. I'm sorry? It's, you're cutting out.
Just before the court, that just be honest.
That was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai? When he met the officer and he called him king, and so he got 3 bakashas. So he asked for Kerem b'Yavne, he asked for to heal Rav Tzadok, and there was a third. What was the third thing that he asked for? You don't have good reception. I can't hear what you're saying. So anyway, so they went into Kerem b'Yavne. Amru, they said, "Asi the Torah shet shtakach mi Yisrael." Eventually, the Torah is going to be forgotten from Klal Yisrael. Shenemar, because it says in the pasuk.
Sorry, he asked the Gnosis.
Could you turn off your video for a second? Maybe then we'll have better reception.
I'm sorry, he asked to spare Gnosis family.
To spare the Gnosis family. Oh, shkoyach. Okay. Shenemar, hine yamim ba'am num Hashem Elokim. There's going to be a time that's going to come. Vishlachti rav haaretz. There's going to be a hunger in the world. Lo rav lalechem, v'lo tzam l'mayim. Not hunger for food, not thirsty for drink. Ki im l'shmoya es divrei Hashem. So you see, there's going to be a tremendous deficit of chachamim. People are going to be thirsty just to know, to learn Torah, and we're not going to have where to learn it from. People are going to move around from ocean to ocean. From north to east. They'll float around. They won't find it. So what is Dvar Hashem? Dvar Hashem zu halacha. Dvar Hashem is referring to halacha, meaning piskei halacha. And Rashi brings down the pasuk to tell us how you know it's halacha. K'dichsiv lahagid lachem is Dvar Hashem ta'anu Torah. So it's Dvar halacha. Dvar Hashem zeh hakates. Rashi says lo yadanim ahich. I don't know where the Gemara gets it from. And Tosfos says the chsiv gabigol shivim l'chalois davar Hashem mipiramia. So you see that the word Dvar Hashem is used in reference to the kates, and Dvar Hashem zu nevuah. And Rashi says for that because it says in the pasuk Dvar Hashem asher hoya el hosheh. Umayi shoyti to levakish is Dvar Hashem. What does it mean they're going to be floating around looking? Amru, they said, Asida Isha, it's going to happen where a woman's going to come. Shetital kikar shel truma. She's going to take a kikar of truma. V'sachser b'vat knesiyah shel b'vat midrashes leida im tmeihi v'im tayri v'ein maven, and nobody maven im tayri im tmeihi, and no one's going to know. Frakti Gemara. The hedik sivei, when it talks about tuman tahira, that's a maforsha thing in the Torah Shabbat. So for sure that will not be forgotten. So how can you suggest people will not know anything about Hilchos Tumah v'Tahira? That's not something that's likely to be forgotten because it's in the Torah Shabbat. Because it says Mikol Oichel Hashayach. So Ella, what is she going to be looking to know? In Rishon Hivim Shnia, she's going to want to know: is this a Rishon L'Tumah or if it's a Sheni L'Tumah? Vein Maven, and that no one will be able to tell her. That's a Mishnah, so we shouldn't be able to forget it. Kiditnan, Hasheret Shenimsa B'Taner. If a sheret is found in a tanner, so let's think about it. The sheret is an avatuma. He's in the oven. That means now anything that's in the oven will become tomei, but what tumah will it acquire? Very simple. The sheret that's in the oven makes the oven into a rishon l'tumah, and anything that's in the oven will become tomei, only a sheni l'tumah. So a sheni l'tumah, a keli, cannot become a sheni l'tumah. So if a sheret is in an oven and there's a cup in that oven, that cup will not become tomei. A cup cannot become a sheni l'tumah. But if there's an apple in that oven, an oichel, a meichel in the oven, that will become a sheni l'tumah. So the halacha is sheret shenimsa b'taner a pasha b'soiches shniya. It becomes a sheni l'tumah. Shataner tchila. The taner is a rishon l'tumah, and it makes the food in it into a sheni l'tumah. Mistafka lahu, and this was the suffix. Hadam le'Rabada bar Ava l'Rava. L'chazia, hai tanura, command the mali tuma. Let's look at this oven as if it's completely filled to the top, meaning anything in the oven is directly being touched by the sheretz because everything is crammed together. And then this have a pas rishona. So then it should be as if the sheretz directly touched the pas, and the pas should be a rishon tuma. And Rava answered, "Amalei lo yamrina lechazia hai tanura makat command amali tuma." You don't say, you don't perceive the oven as if it's completely full, and therefore it's perceived as if the sheretz directly touched the bread and made it into a rishon. Rather, it's empty. The sheretz just makes the tanner into a rishon, and through avir, the tanner makes the food into a sheni. The tanner we looked in the brisa, yochel yukol akelim mitamin ba'aver kli cheres. You might have thought that any keli, if I have a glass, a cup, a metal cup inside a kli cheres, and the mouse is in there, you might think that they would make the metal cup tamei. Tamei loimer kol asher b'soicha yitma, and then the pasuk says mikol oichel asher yochel. The Torah says the only thing that will become tamei in the avir of a kli cheres is oichlin umashkin, is food, not kalim. Oichlin metamin ba'avir kli cheres. Only oichlin can become tamei ba'avir kli cheres because the oichlin could become a sheni. Then kalim metamin ba'avir kli cheres because a keli cannot be a sheni. So you actually learn two things from here. A, you learn is you don't look like you don't look at the thing that it's all full of tumah. You don't look at it like the sheretz came into direct contact with anything that's in the oven. And the second thing you learn from here is a keli cannot become a sheni l'tumah, and therefore a keli will never be able to become tamei in the avir of a kli cheres. Tanya b'shem ben Yochi Yomer, chas v'sholom she'tishtakach Torah miYisrael. How could you say that Torah will be forgotten from Klal Yisrael? Shenemar, it says ki lo yishakach mipi zaroi. Elama ani mekai mishajitu levakesh eshtavar Hashem v'liyimtzu. What does it mean they won't be able to find it? It shelo yimsu halacha brura u'mishna brura. They won't be able to find clear halachas where there's no machlokes. Rather, today everything is controversy. Everything has a separate opinion. Halacha brura, mishnah brura b'makam echad. Rather, everything is going to be under dispute. There's a little machlokes in. There'll be a lack of clarity, and that's what it means. Torah will be forgotten. Not that it'll totally be forgotten, but it means that there'll be a lot of different opinions. I guess we could stop here. A good chodesh. A good chodesh. This should be a chodesh of Yom Tov, like the Rav said yesterday. That Tisha B'Av says the Kor Alai Moed. It could be a Yom Tov. Mashiach come, and let's hope that we shouldn't have to fast this Tisha B'Av.
Shkoyach. Rabbi Yosy, isn't today the yard side of Aaron HaKohen?
I don't know.
I think so. It's Rosh Chodesh Av, I think.
Rosh Chodesh Av is Aaron HaKohen's yard side?
Yes, Rosh Chodesh Av.
Oh, it's a very big yard site. This is the Chagray's yard site.
Remember Mr. Deutsch used to collect money for a ticket for Aaron HaKohen's yard site.
He did? You mean Zalman Deutsch?
Yeah.
I don't remember that. Wow, look at that. Look at that. Oh, I don't have it. My website doesn't change to the next month yet. Okay, have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Kiva, is Kiva there?
No, he's not.
I saw him in shul this morning. He was at the next meeting. He left right before. Right. I think he left before laning. I think. Oh, no. He left right.